The notification sound from my wife's phone cut through the 3 a.m. silence like a blade. Mara didn't even stir beside me, but I'd been awake for hours anyway, staring at the ceiling of our supposedly perfect townhouse. Another ping, then another. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I'm Nick Delaney, 40 years old, owner of Precision Self-Defense Studio downtown. Ex-military, the kind of guy who notices things others miss. Like how my wife of 12 years had started sleeping with her phone under her pillow. Like how she'd been posting those spiritual Instagram quotes about toxic relationships and protecting your energy from negative people. Real rich, coming from someone married to me. The blue glow from her screen illuminated her face as she finally grabbed the device. Even in the darkness, I could see her smile, the kind she used to save for me. "Work emergency?" I asked, my voice cutting through the pretense. She jumped, clutching the phone to her chest. "God, Nick, you scared me. It's just Jade. She's having another crisis with her boyfriend." Jade. Mara's best friend since college. The kind of woman who treated other people's marriages like her personal entertainment. Always stirring the pot, always there with a shoulder to cry on when the drama she helped create finally exploded. At 3 a.m? You know how she gets. Mara rolled away from me, taking her secrets with her. I knew how a lot of people got. In my line of work, teaching self-defense to everyone from scared teenagers to domestic violence survivors, you learn to read body language like a second language. The way someone holds their shoulders when they're lying. The micro-expressions that leak through even the best poker faces. My wife was lying. Had been for weeks. The next morning brought more evidence. Mara hummed while making coffee. Actually hummed, like she was starring in her own romantic movie. She'd been doing that a lot lately, ever since her new spiritual advisor had started renting her luxury Airbnb property downtown. "Pastor Eli is extending his stay another month," she announced, not meeting my eyes. "He's doing such important work in the community, helping people find their authentic selves." Pastor Eli Carruthers. 38 years old, drove a flashy imported coupe that cost more than most people's yearly salary, and had the kind of manufactured charisma that made my skin crawl. He'd shown up 2 months ago, claiming to be some kind of traveling minister, looking for a sanctuary space to conduct his spiritual healing sessions. What he'd found was my wife. "Important work," I repeated. "Like what, exactly?" "You wouldn't understand." Mara's voice carried that new edge, the one that suggested I was somehow deficient for asking questions. "You're so cynical about everything spiritual. Eli says that negative energy can be really damaging to people trying to heal," Eli says. Everything was Eli says these days. "Where's Tommy?" I asked, noticing our 15-year-old son's usual breakfast mess was missing from the kitchen. "He left early, said he had a project to work on before school." Mara's phone buzzed again, and that smile crept back across her face. "I should get going too. Eli wants to discuss expanding his healing practice." She kissed my cheek, a perfunctory gesture that felt more like dismissal than affection, and practically floated out the door. I sat alone in our kitchen, surrounded by the carefully curated perfection that had become our life. Granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, family photos that looked more like stock imagery than actual memories. Everything designed to project success and happiness to the outside world. My phone buzzed with a text from Omar, my assistant instructor at the studio. "Mrs. McCloskey called. Says she needs to talk to you about something important." Seemed upset. Mrs. McCloskey was our 70-year-old neighbor, the kind of woman who knew everyone's business but usually kept it to herself. If she was reaching out, something was seriously wrong. I found her waiting in her garden, hands shaking as she watered plants that were already drowning. "Nick, honey, I don't know how to say this. Her voice was barely above a whisper. It's about your boy, and that man who's been coming around. My blood turned to ice water. What about Tommy? Yesterday afternoon I saw him coming home from school. That pastor fellow was waiting by your front door. Tommy tried to go around back, but the man grabbed his arm, started saying something about keeping family secrets and consequences for little boys who can't keep their mouths shut. The world tilted sideways. Did he hurt him? He pushed Tommy up against the door, hard. The boy looked terrified, Nick. When your wife came home, she saw them talking, but she just smiled and invited the man inside, like nothing was wrong. I thanked Mrs. McCloskey and walked back to my house on autopilot, muscle memory carrying me while my mind processed this new information. Inside, I went straight to Tommy's room. My son was meticulous, almost obsessively organized, a trait he'd inherited from me. Everything in its place, bed made with military precision. But his desk drawer was slightly open, and when I looked inside, I found something that made my hands shake. A small digital recorder, the kind I'd taught him to use for school projects. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. Tommy's voice scared and small. I don't know who's going to hear this, but if something happens to me, it's because of Mom's friend, Pastor Eli. He said if I tell Dad about what I saw, he'll make sure I regret it. He said God punishes little boys who break up families. The recording continued. I saw them, Dad, Mom and him, in your gym, after hours, and he hits her sometimes, but she acts like she likes it. He saw me watching through the window and said if I ever tell anyone, he'll hurt you too. He said he's done it before. The recorder slipped from my hands and clattered to the floor. I'd spent 20 years in the military, trained in combat, survived situations that would break most people. But nothing had prepared me for the rage that consumed me in that moment. Not just anger at Eli, but at Mara. At the realization that my wife was not only betraying our marriage, but allowing some psychopath to terrorize our child. My phone rang. Tommy calling from school. Dad? His voice was barely a whisper. Can you come get me? I don't want to go home today. I'm on my way, son. As I drove to Tommy's school, my mind shifted into tactical mode. This wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about protection, strategy, and justice. Eli Carruthers had made the mistake of threatening my family. He was about to learn why that was a very bad idea. But first, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with, and that meant doing some reconnaissance. Tommy was waiting by the school entrance when I arrived, his backpack clutched against his chest like armor. The confident kid who usually bounded toward my car had been replaced by someone who kept glancing over his shoulder, checking shadows. Dad, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. His words tumbled out as soon as he got in the car. I was scared. He said he'd hurt you if I said anything, and Mom kept saying how happy she was, and I didn't know what to do. I pulled over and turned to face my son. Really, face him. The dark circles under his eyes, the way he flinched when I reached out to squeeze his shoulder. How long had this been going on while I'd been obliviously teaching other people how to protect themselves? Tommy, listen to me. None of this is your fault. Not one bit. You did exactly what you should have done by recording that message. You're braver than most adults I know. Some color returned to his face. What are we going to do? We're going to fix this. But I need you to stay with your Uncle Mike and Aunt Sarah for a few days while I handle it. My brother Mike lived across town with his wife Sarah and their twin daughters. They'd always been good to Tommy, and more importantly, they were completely outside this situation. Safe. After dropping Tommy off with strict instructions to stay put and call me every few hours, I drove to my studio. Precision Self-Defense occupied a converted warehouse downtown, complete with training mats, heavy bags, and a small office where I kept my business records and my security equipment. People don't realize how much surveillance technology has advanced in recent years. As someone who taught personal protection, I'd invested in some serious hardware. cameras with night vision, audio recording devices smaller than quarters, GPS trackers that could hide in a coin slot. I'd installed a comprehensive security system at our house 6 months ago, supposedly to protect against break-ins. What I'd really created was a surveillance network that covered every angle of our property, including the home gym in our basement, where apparently my wife had been entertaining her spiritual advisor. Omar arrived as I was reviewing the equipment. "Boss, you look like someone who's about to do something stupid." Omar was 25, built like a linebacker, and had been working with me for 3 years. More importantly, he was loyal, discreet, and had a flexible relationship with traditional law enforcement methods. Potentially, how do you feel about some after-hours reconnaissance work? Depends. Are we talking legal reconnaissance or the other kind? The completely legal kind. I want to know everything about Eli Carruthers. Where he goes, who he talks to, what he does when he thinks nobody's watching. Omar grinned. "I do love a good mystery. What's our timeline?" "Fast. And Omar, this stays between us until I say otherwise." We spent the next hour planning our approach. Omar would handle the digital investigation, social media, public records, financial information. I would focus on physical surveillance and gathering evidence from my own home. That evening, I waited until Mara left for her book club, which I now suspected was code for something else entirely, before accessing my security system. What I found in the archived footage made my stomach turn. 3 weeks of recordings showed Eli coming and going from our house at all hours. Sometimes Mara let him in through the front door, all smiles and casual conversation. Other times, he used a key to enter through the back while she was supposedly at work. But it was the basement footage that truly enraged me. My home gym was my sanctuary, the place where I worked out my frustrations, maintained the physical conditioning that kept me sharp, surrounded myself with the discipline and order that military life had ingrained in me. Seeing Mara and Eli defiling that space was like watching someone urinate on my father's grave. The recordings showed them having sex on my weight bench, using my equipment for their twisted games. Eli dominating and degrading my wife in ways that made me want to put my fist through the monitor. But worse than the adultery was what I saw in the later recordings. Eli's true nature emerging once he thought he had complete control. The way he grabbed Mara's throat when she disagreed with him. The casual violence that preceded their encounters. The moment when Tommy's face appeared briefly in the basement window, and Eli's expression shifted to something predatory and dangerous. I watched my son disappear from the frame, saw Eli say something to Mara that made her nod frantically, then saw him storm upstairs. The timestamp matched what Mrs. McCloskey had described, Eli confronting Tommy at our front door. My phone buzzed with a text from Omar. "Found some interesting stuff about your pastor friend. Not actually ordained by any legitimate organization. Real name is Elliot Crenshaw, wanted for fraud in 3 states. Also has a sealed juvenile record in Ohio that I'm working on cracking." Another text followed. "Gets better. The fancy car is leased under a fake identity. He's been running spiritual healing scams across the Midwest for 2 years. Always targets married women with money." I leaned back in my chair, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Eli wasn't just some charismatic predator who'd happened upon my wife. He was a professional con artist, and we were his latest marks. The question was how deep Mara was in his web, victim or willing accomplice. My phone rang. Mara, calling from her book club. "Hi, honey, just wanted to let you know I'll be late tonight. We're having such a deep discussion about relationships and personal growth. Jade thinks I should consider writing a blog about my spiritual journey." In the background, I could hear music and laughter. Male laughter. "Sounds enlightening. Where exactly is this book club meeting?" A pause. "At Jade's place." "Why?" "Just curious. What book are you discussing?" Another pause, longer this time. It's about finding your authentic self. You probably wouldn't be interested." "Try me." "Nick, why are you interrogating me? This is exactly the kind of controlling behavior that Eli warned me about. He said some men can't handle their wives growing as people. Eli warned her. About me. In my own house, with my own son as collateral damage, this predator was turning my wife against me. "I'll see you when you get home," I said, and hung up. I spent the rest of the evening making copies of everything: the security footage, Tommy's recording, Omar's research on Eli's criminal background, multiple copies, stored in different locations, because I had a feeling things were about to get very complicated. Around midnight, I heard Mara's car in the driveway. I was waiting in the living room when she came in, and the guilt was written all over her face. Flushed cheeks, disheveled hair, clothes slightly askew. She looked like a woman who'd spent the evening doing everything except discussing literature. "How was book club?" "Great. Really eye-opening." She wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm exhausted. Going to bed." "Mara." My voice stopped her at the bottom of the stairs. "We need to talk." "Can it wait until tomorrow? I'm really tired." "It's about Tommy and Eli." Her face went white. "What about them?" "I know what's been going on. All of it." For a moment I thought she might confess, might break down and admit that she'd gotten in over her head with a dangerous man, might choose her family over whatever twisted hold Eli had on her. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and looked me directly in the eye. "I don't know what you think you know, but you're wrong. Eli is a good man who's helped me realize how unhappy I've been, how controlling and paranoid you've become. He threatened our son." "That's ridiculous. Eli loves children. He would never hurt Tommy." "I have proof." "You have paranoid delusions. And if you keep making these accusations, I'll have no choice but to protect myself and Tommy from your increasingly erratic behavior." She turned and walked upstairs, leaving me alone with the devastating realization that my wife wasn't Eli's victim. She was his partner. The war had officially begun. The next morning, Mara was gone before I woke up. No note, no explanation, just an empty coffee pot and the lingering scent of her perfume. I found a text on my phone sent at 6 a.m. "Taking some time to think. Don't try to contact me." Omar was already at the studio when I arrived, surrounded by printouts and looking like he'd been up all night. "Boss, your pastor friend is even worse than we thought." He handed me a thick folder. "Elliot Crenshaw has been running this same scam for years. Targets middle-class married women, usually ones with successful husbands and some disposable income. Poses as a spiritual advisor, gets them emotionally dependent, then systematically isolates them from their support systems." I flipped through the documentation. Police reports from Kansas City, St. Louis, Indianapolis. Always the same pattern. Married women who suddenly emptied joint bank accounts, filed for divorce citing emotional abuse, then disappeared with their children and their new spiritual advisor. "The Kansas City case is interesting," Omar continued. "Woman named Patricia Hendricks. Married 15 years, 2 kids, husband owned a small construction company. She met Eli at a spiritual retreat, started having him stay at their rental property. 3 months later, she cleaned out their savings and moved to Colorado with him." "What happened to the husband?" "Suicide. 6 months after she left." Omar's expression was grim. "But here's the thing. Patricia Hendricks died in a car accident in Colorado 2 weeks after they arrived. Eli inherited everything as her spiritual advisor and designated beneficiary." "How many others?" "3 that I can confirm. All similar circumstances, all gone within months of leaving their families." I set the folder down with shaking hands. This wasn't just about adultery or even fraud. Eli Carruthers was a predator who destroyed families for profit, and my wife was either his next victim or his newest accomplice. My phone buzzed with a call from Tommy's school. "Mr. Delaney, this is Principal Martinez. Tommy didn't show up today and we can't reach your wife. Is everything all right?" Ice formed in my stomach. "What do you mean he didn't show up? I dropped him off at my brother's house yesterday." I called Mike immediately. Nick, what are you talking about? Tommy never came here. Sarah and I were expecting him, but he never showed up. The world tilted sideways. I'd dropped Tommy off at school yesterday morning, told him to wait for me to pick him up, but Mara had gotten to him first. I called her phone, straight to voicemail. Mara, if you're listening to this, bring Tommy home right now. Whatever's going on between us, leave him out of it. Omar was already grabbing his jacket. Where do we start looking? Eli's rental property. If she's with him, that's where they'd go. Mara's luxury Airbnb was a converted loft downtown, the kind of place that looked amazing in photos but felt sterile and impersonal in reality. I'd helped her renovate it 2 years ago, back when we were still a team working toward shared goals. Now, it felt like enemy territory. The building manager, a guy named Pete, who knew me from the renovation work, led us into the common areas. Haven't seen your wife today, but that pastor fellow was here early this morning. Seemed agitated about something. Had a bunch of luggage with him. What kind of luggage? Suitcases, boxes, like he was moving out. Oh, and there was a kid with them, teenager. Looked upset. Tommy. They had Tommy. Any idea where they went? Pete shrugged. The pastor mentioned something about a spiritual retreat. Said he was taking his followers somewhere they could find peace. Back at the studio, I called Detective Sarah Hendricks, no relation to Eli's Kansas City victim. Just an unfortunate coincidence. She'd worked with me on a few cases where my self-defense students had been involved in domestic violence situations. Nick, I can't officially investigate a missing person case until someone's been gone for 24 hours. And technically, if Mara took Tommy, that's not kidnapping, she's his mother. What if I told you she's with a known con artist who's wanted in 3 states? Then I'd say you need to file a formal complaint and provide evidence. But Nick... Her voice carried a warning. Don't do anything stupid. If this guy is as dangerous as you think, going after him alone is exactly the wrong move. But I wasn't alone. I had Omar, and more importantly, I had 20 years of military training and a very specific set of skills that Eli Carruthers had probably never encountered. Omar, how do you feel about a road trip? Depends on the destination. I spread out a map of the surrounding states. Eli's pattern is to move his victims to isolated locations, somewhere he can control the environment completely. Rural areas, places where screaming won't bring help. We spent the next hour cross-referencing properties in Eli's various fake names, looking for rentals or purchases in remote locations within driving distance. Omar's computer skills proved invaluable. He found 3 properties that matched our criteria. A farmhouse in rural Missouri, rented under the name Elliot Carson. A cabin in the Arkansas mountains, purchased by E. Crenshaw Ministries. A compound in Oklahoma that advertised itself as a spiritual healing retreat. The Oklahoma property is interesting, Omar noted. Bought 6 months ago with cash. Registered as a religious organization for tax purposes. And look at this. The previous owner died in what police ruled an accidental overdose. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your family is safe and happy. Stop looking for them, or that might change. A friend. I showed the message to Omar. Well, that's not ominous at all, he said. So which property do we hit first? All of them, but we're not going in blind. I opened my gun safe and began selecting equipment. Not weapons. I wasn't planning to shoot anyone, but surveillance gear, protective equipment, and yes, a few items that might prove persuasive in negotiations. Boss, are you sure about this? If we're wrong about where they are, or if this goes sideways... Omar, that psychopath has my son. He's threatened to eliminate Tommy if he talks. He's manipulated my wife into abandoning her family. And he's got a history of making people disappear. I'm not waiting for the police to figure out jurisdiction while my boy is in danger. Then let's go get him back. As we loaded Omar's truck with equipment, my phone rang. Jade, Mara's best friend and enabler. Nick, You need to stop this crazy behavior. Mara is scared of you. She says you've been threatening her and following her around. Jade, where are they? I don't know what you're talking about. My 15-year-old son is missing, along with my wife and her con artist boyfriend. If you know where they are and something happens to Tommy, you're going to be an accessory to kidnapping. A long pause. Mara said you might try to turn this around on her. She said you've been emotionally abusive for years, and now you're having some kind of breakdown. Did she also mention that her spiritual advisor is actually a career criminal who's wanted for fraud in multiple states, or that he's been threatening our son? That's ridiculous. Eli is a man of God. He's helping Mara find her strength. Jade, listen to me very carefully. Eli Carruthers has eliminated at least 3 women after manipulating them into leaving their families. If you're helping him, you're not just betraying our friendship, you're potentially an accomplice to murder. Another pause, shorter this time. You're insane. Don't call me again. She hung up, but something in her voice suggested I'd planted a seed of doubt. Jade was selfish and dramatic, but she wasn't stupid. If I was right about Eli's history, she might start asking questions. My phone immediately rang again. This time, it was Mara. Nick, you need to stop harassing my friends. Jade is upset, and she doesn't deserve to be dragged into your paranoid fantasies. Where's Tommy? He's with me, and he's fine. Better than fine, actually. He's finally in an environment where he doesn't have to walk on eggshells around his father's anger. Let me talk to him. Absolutely not. You've done enough damage already. Mara, bring him home. Right now. Whatever Eli has told you about me, whatever he's promised you, it's all lies. He's a con artist with a history of... I know exactly what he is, Nick. He's a man who sees my value, who appreciates my spiritual gifts, who doesn't try to control every aspect of my life. The line went silent. I stared at my phone, processing what she'd just said. I know exactly what he is. Not denial, not shock at my accusations. Acknowledgement. Mara knew who Eli really was, and she didn't care. Or worse, she was actively participating in his schemes. Change of plans, I told Omar. We're not just rescuing my son. We're taking down a criminal organization. Now you're talking my language, Omar replied, checking his equipment one more time. Let's go to war. The Oklahoma compound sat on 40 acres of scrubland, surrounded by chain-link fence topped with razor wire. A hand-painted sign at the gate read, New Dawn Spiritual Retreat, Private Property, No Trespassing. Security cameras were mounted every 50 feet along the perimeter. Omar and I had been watching the place for 6 hours from a ridge a quarter-mile away, using military-grade binoculars to map the layout. 3 buildings, a main house, a smaller dormitory-style structure, and what looked like a workshop or garage. 2 vehicles in the driveway, Eli's flashy coupe, and a white van with no windows. Motion sensors along the fence, Omar noted, tracking the electronic equipment with practiced eyes. But the coverage has gaps. Old system, probably installed by the previous owner. Guards? Haven't seen any, but that doesn't mean they're not there. My phone had been silent for 4 hours. No calls, no texts, no demands or negotiations. That worried me more than threats would have. Silence meant Eli was confident in his position, which suggested he had advantages I hadn't anticipated. There, Omar said suddenly, pointing toward the main house. Movement in the upstairs window. I adjusted my binoculars and felt my heart skip. Tommy's face appeared briefly in what looked like a bedroom window, then vanished. He was alive, but the bars on the outside of the window told me everything I needed to know about his situation. He's being held prisoner, I said. Looks that way. Question is, how many other people are in there with him? We'd discovered during our surveillance that the New Dawn Spiritual Retreat had been advertising online for seekers looking to disconnect from toxic relationships and find their authentic selves. The kind of vague spiritual language that attracted vulnerable people looking for easy answers to complex problems. According to the website, participants paid $5,000 for a transformative month-long experience that included digital detox, spiritual counseling, and liberation from negative influences. In other words, Eli was running a cult. Boss, we need to think about this strategically. If there are other people in there, paying customers who think they're on some kind of spiritual retreat, we can't just go in guns blazing. Omar was right, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to storm that compound and get my son out of there. The rational part of my brain knew that was exactly what Eli would be expecting. My phone finally rang, unknown number again. Nick Delaney. Eli's voice was smooth, confident, with just a hint of mockery. I was wondering when you'd track us down. Military training does have its advantages, doesn't it? Where's my son? Safe, learning some valuable lessons about family loyalty and the consequences of betrayal. If you hurt him, you'll what? Storm my compound like some kind of action hero? I don't think so. You see, Nick, I've done my research on you too. Honorable discharge, exemplary service record, not a single black mark on your military file. You're not the kind of man who does anything that might endanger innocent people. What innocent people? The 12 spiritual seekers currently participating in our retreat program. Vulnerable souls who've paid good money to find peace and healing. It would be tragic if something happened to them because of your reckless behavior. 12 hostages. Eli had surrounded himself with human shields. What do you want? Simple. Walk away. Mara has made her choice, and Tommy is better off without a father who can't respect his mother's decisions. Accept that your family has moved on, and everyone stays safe. And if I don't? Well, let's just say that spiritual retreats can be dangerous places. People sometimes have accidents when they're not properly supervised. Falls, drowning, accidental overdoses. The kind of tragedies that happen when troubled individuals push themselves too hard in pursuit of enlightenment. The line went silent. I turned to Omar. He's got 12 civilians in there as hostages, paying customers who think they're on some kind of spiritual retreat. Shit. That changes everything. No, it doesn't. It just makes the approach more complicated. I pulled out my phone and called Detective Hendricks. Sarah, I need you to listen carefully. I've found Eli Carruthers, and he's running a cult compound in Oklahoma. He's got my son, my wife, and at least 12 other people being held against their will. Nick, slow down. What's your location? I gave her the coordinates. I need you to contact the FBI. This crosses state lines, involves kidnapping and fraud, and probably a dozen other federal crimes. I'm on it. But Nick, promise me you won't do anything until backup arrives. If this guy is as dangerous as you think, he just threatened to eliminate my son and 12 other people if I don't walk away. I'm not waiting for a federal task force to get organized. Nick. I hung up and turned back to Omar. How long do you think it would take the FBI to mobilize for something like this? Best case scenario? 6 hours. More likely 12 to 24. Tommy doesn't have that long. We spent the next hour planning our approach. The compound's security was designed to keep people out, but it also worked to keep people in. The razor wire and motion sensors that protected Eli also trapped his victims. But every fortress has weaknesses, and I'd spent 2 decades learning how to find them. The workshop building, I said, studying the layout through my binoculars. It's connected to the main house by an underground tunnel, probably used by the previous owner for storage or maybe bootlegging. If we can get into that building, we might be able to reach the main house without triggering the perimeter alarms. And then what? We still don't know how many people Eli has working with him, or where exactly the hostages are being kept. Then we improvise. Omar grinned. Now you're talking my language. As the sun set, we made our move. The gap in the motion sensor coverage was only about 3 feet wide, but it was enough. We slipped through the fence and made our way across the compound, staying low and moving in the shadows. The workshop was unlocked, overconfidence on Eli's part, or maybe he wanted me to find the tunnel. Either way, we were inside within minutes. The building was full of construction equipment and supplies, but in the back corner, we found what we were looking for, a wooden door built into the floor, leading to a tunnel that disappeared into darkness. After you, boss. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for one person, and smelled of earth and decay. We crawled through it for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, following the faint glow of light from the other end. We emerged in the basement of the main house, in what looked like a storage room filled with boxes and old furniture. And voices. Lots of voices coming from directly above us. Welcome to New Dawn, everyone. Tonight marks the beginning of your transformation. Eli's voice, smooth and hypnotic, addressing what sounded like a large group. You've all taken the first step by leaving behind the toxic relationships and negative influences that were holding you back. But true liberation requires sacrifice. It requires absolute trust in the process. Omar and I crept up the basement stairs, following the sound of Eli's voice. The main floor of the house had been converted into a meeting space, with folding chairs arranged in a circle around a makeshift altar. 12 people sat in those chairs, ranging in age from early 20s to late 60s. They looked tired, confused, and more than a little scared. Several had the hollow-eyed appearance of people who hadn't been eating or sleeping properly. Eli stood at the center of the circle, dressed in flowing white robes that made him look like some kind of prophet. Mara sat beside him, wearing a similar outfit and gazing at him with the kind of adoration usually reserved for religious figures. Tonight we're going to contact the spirits of your former lives, Eli continued. But first, we need to ensure that no negative energy can interfere with our work. That means surrendering all connections to your old existence. He gestured to a pile of cell phones, wallets, and personal belongings in the center of the circle. These material possessions are anchors that keep you trapped in patterns of suffering. By releasing them, you release yourselves. One of the participants, a middle-aged woman with graying hair, raised her hand tentatively. Excuse me, but I'd like to call my daughter, just to let her know I'm all right. Eli's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Margaret, we've discussed this. Your daughter is part of the toxic family system that brought you here. Contacting her now would undo all the progress you've made. But she'll be worried? She'll be fine. Trust the process, Margaret. Trust me. The woman nodded reluctantly and settled back into her chair, but I could see the doubt in her posture. Now, Eli continued, let's begin tonight's ceremony. Close your eyes and open your hearts to the wisdom of the ancients. As the group closed their eyes, Eli made a subtle gesture to someone behind the circle. A man I hadn't noticed before, tall, muscular, with the kind of eyes that suggested he'd done this before, moved to stand behind Margaret's chair. I realized with horror that we were about to witness a murder. I had maybe 10 seconds to act before Margaret became Eli's next victim. The muscular man was already reaching into his jacket, and Eli was beginning some kind of chanted prayer that would mask whatever sound came next. Omar saw it too. He pointed toward the back stairs, indicating he would circle around to cut off escape routes. I nodded and moved toward the main room, my military training taking over. 20 years of combat experience had taught me that sometimes the best strategy is the most direct one. I stepped into the circle of chairs and spoke in my command voice, the one that had stopped soldiers in their tracks and made enemy combatants think twice about their life choices. Everyone open your eyes and stand up. Now. The effect was immediate and electric. 12 confused retreat participants snapped to attention, their survival instincts overriding whatever psychological manipulation Eli had been using. The muscular man spun toward me, his hand freezing halfway to his weapon. Eli's face went through a fascinating series of expressions: surprise, anger, calculation, and finally a cold smile that confirmed everything I'd suspected about his true nature. Nick Delaney, right on schedule. He gestured casually, and I heard footsteps from multiple directions. I was hoping you'd make it inside. It's so much easier to clean up loose ends when they come to you. Where's my son? Safe. For now. But his continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation. The retreat participants were looking back and forth between us, confusion and fear warring on their faces. Margaret, the woman who'd wanted to call her daughter, was staring at the muscular man who'd been standing behind her chair. "Were you going to hurt me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Margaret, don't let this man's negative energy confuse you," Eli said smoothly. "He's exactly the kind of toxic influence we've been working to eliminate from your life. I'm Nick Delaney, my wife is sitting right there, and this man has kidnapped my 15-year-old son." I spoke directly to the group, ignoring Eli's attempts to maintain control. "How many of you have tried to contact your families since you've been here?" Silence. Then Margaret raised her hand tentatively. "He said it would interfere with our spiritual progress." "How many of you paid $5,000 for this retreat?" More hands went up, nearly all of them. "And how many of you have been told that your families are toxic, that you need to cut all ties with them to achieve enlightenment?" Every hand in the circle rose. "You're not at a spiritual retreat," I continued. "You're at a criminal compound run by a con artist named Elliot Crenshaw. He's wanted for fraud in 3 states, and at least 3 women who got involved with him are gone." Eli's facade finally cracked. "Enough!" The muscular man drew his gun, but Omar appeared behind him like a ghost, pressing a taser to his neck. The man dropped without a sound. "Sorry I'm late," Omar said cheerfully. "Had to take care of a couple other guys outside. Turns out our pastor friend had quite a security detail." Eli's eyes darted toward the exits, calculating odds and distances, but I'd positioned myself between him and the main door, and Omar had the back stairs covered. "Mara," Eli said, his voice taking on an urgent tone. Tell them how happy you've been since we've been together. Tell them about your husband's controlling behavior." My wife looked up at him with those same adoring eyes, then turned to face me. For a moment, I thought she might actually defend him, might choose this psychopath over her own family. Instead, she started laughing. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the bitter, broken laughter of someone who'd been holding onto a secret for too long. "Oh, Eli," she said, shaking her head. "You really thought I was just another mark, didn't you?" Eli's confident expression faltered. "What are you talking about?" Mara stood up and walked over to me, her movements loose and casual, in a way they hadn't been for months. "Nick, meet Special Agent Mara Delaney, FBI Financial Crimes Division. I've been undercover for 6 months, building a case against Mr. Crenshaw here." The room went completely silent. Even Omar looked stunned. The affair, the spiritual advisor routine, all of it. It was cover while I gathered evidence on his operation. We've been tracking him since the Kansas City case, but we needed someone on the inside to get the kind of evidence that would stick in court. Eli's face had gone white. "That's impossible. You're lying." "Am I?" Mara pulled a small recording device from her robe. "I've got 6 months of conversations where you detailed your entire operation, including your plans for these 12 people and your threats against my son." "Tommy," I said, my voice hoarse with relief and residual fear. "Where is he?" "Safe house in town with 2 other agents. He's been there since yesterday morning. The whole kidnapping thing was theater to get you to track down this compound so we could move in with probable cause." I stared at my wife, my FBI agent wife, trying to process this revelation. "You've been undercover for 6 months, living with him, pretending to be in love with him, letting him into our house, around our son. It was the only way, Nick. Eli's too smart to get caught by traditional surveillance. We needed someone he trusted completely. And you couldn't tell me? Your reactions had to be genuine. If you'd known I was undercover, you might have tipped him off without meaning to. Plus, we needed him to believe he'd successfully isolated me from my support system. Omar cleared his throat. This is all very touching, but shouldn't we be arresting people about now? As if summoned by his words, the sound of helicopters filled the air outside. Through the windows, I could see FBI tactical teams surrounding the compound. Eli made one last desperate play, lunging toward Margaret with a knife that seemed to appear from nowhere. But 20 years of teaching self-defense had left me with reflexes that operated independently of conscious thought. I intercepted him before he'd taken 2 steps, using a move I'd taught to hundreds of students. His knife went flying, and he hit the floor hard, my knee pressed against his spine and my hand controlling his head. "Elliot Crenshaw," I said, borrowing Mara's official tone. "You're under arrest for kidnapping, fraud, conspiracy, and being a general piece of human garbage." The FBI agents who flooded into the room a few seconds later were almost anticlimactic. Epilogue: The truth about glass houses. 6 months later, I was sitting in a federal courtroom watching Eli Carruthers, real name Elliot Crenshaw, get sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. The judge had not been impressed by his attempts to claim religious persecution or his lawyer's arguments about spiritual freedom. The evidence Mara had gathered during her undercover operation had been devastating. 6 months of recorded conversations where Eli detailed his methods for manipulating vulnerable people, his plans for the retreat participants, and his casual discussions of the accidents that had befallen his previous victims. The 12 people from the compound had all testified about their experiences. Margaret, the woman who'd wanted to call her daughter, had become something of a spokesperson for the group, describing how Eli had systematically isolated them from their families and support systems while draining their bank accounts. 3 other compounds in different states had been raided based on information from Eli's operation. 47 people had been rescued, and investigators had found evidence linking Eli to at least 6 fatalities over the past 5 years. Mara and I were working on rebuilding our marriage, which turned out to be complicated when your wife's job involves pretending to have affairs with criminals. We were in counseling, real counseling, not the spiritual manipulation kind, and slowly learning how to trust each other again. Tommy had handled the whole experience better than either of us had expected. Knowing that his mother was an FBI agent had apparently made him something of a celebrity at school. He'd also started taking my self-defense classes more seriously, joking that he wanted to be prepared in case Mom brought work home again. The media had dubbed the case the False Prophet Murders, and several documentaries were already in production. Mara had been promoted and transferred to a new unit that specialized in cult-related crimes. Apparently, there were more people like Eli out there than anyone wanted to admit. Omar had parlayed his role in the investigation into a job with a private security firm that paid twice what I could afford. We still worked together sometimes, and he never let me forget that he'd been the one to actually arrest Eli's muscle. As for me, I'd learned some valuable lessons about assumptions, communication, and the importance of asking questions even when you think you know the answers. My marriage had survived, my son was safe, and a dangerous predator was off the streets. But I'd also learned something else. Sometimes the person you think you know best is the one keeping the biggest secrets. And sometimes those secrets are the only thing standing between your family and a monster. Eli was led away in shackles, still protesting his innocence and claiming he'd been framed by a corrupt FBI conspiracy. The families of his victims watched from the gallery, finally seeing justice for their loved ones. As we walked out of the courthouse, Mara took my hand. "Any regrets?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. 6 months of thinking my wife was having an affair. 6 months of believing my marriage was falling apart. 6 months of feeling like I was losing everything that mattered to me. "Just one," I said. I wish you could have trusted me enough to let me in on the plan from the beginning." "Next time," she said with a smile. "Next time, we're taking a normal vacation, somewhere with beaches and room service and absolutely no spiritual advisors." "Deal." We walked toward our car, where Tommy was waiting with ice cream and stories about his day at school. A normal family, dealing with normal problems, grateful for the ordinary miracle of being together and safe. Behind us, the courthouse doors closed on one of the most dangerous predators any of us had ever encountered. Eli Carruthers would spend the rest of his life in a concrete cell with no one to manipulate and no families to destroy. Sometimes justice is swift and dramatic. Sometimes it takes months of careful planning and dangerous undercover work. But either way, it's worth the wait.